NCPC staff for the generosity by participating in the 2012 combined federal campaign. We had a 100% participation rate this year. We raised over $15,000 for a number of local and national charities. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Cheryl Kelly, who led this year's effort, and she was assisted by Dareth Bush and Kenny Walton. So thank you to the staff for their generosity. And with that, I'd like to conclude my presentation today.
Thank you, Mr. Costa, very much. Agenda item number 3 is the legislative update. And Ms. Schuyler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a couple of things. I thought I'd just quickly give you a legislative summary of the 112th Congress. We've now entered the 113th. During the 112th, I tracked 40 bills, 3 of which became public laws. Of the 40, 15 pertain to commemorative works, and one of them did become a public law, which is a World War I memorial on the mall, which is allocated a half of an acre on the mall for a memorial, as long as it cannot interfere with the District of Columbia's memorial. There were 8 museums, none of which became public law. There were what I call 6 government employee related, included one that talked about customer service improvement, several that dealt with amendments to the Hatch Act, several that dealt with the relationship of federal employees and delinquent taxes. The only one that became public law in this group was Hatch Act amendments. The District of Columbia, you are now considered local government employees versus federal government employees. I then had what I called 8 GSA property disposal related bills. None of those became public law. They were of interest because they at times talked about certain federal buildings being disposed and used for certain uses. Finally, I had 3 miscellaneous related to NCPC work, the only one of which became public law was the technical amendments to the Southwest waterfront, which allowed the property to be disposed and redevelopment to proceed. We're now in the new Congress, and there's been several memorial related bills introduced. The first is a Man in the Sea Memorial Act, which will honor members of the armed forces that served as divers, and it's to be placed in the Washington Navy Yard. It will all be done under the control of the Secretary of the Navy versus commemorative works, but since it could be a development project within the district, this commission might see it. Recently, just yesterday, a bill was introduced to provide for donor contribution acknowledgement to be displayed at the Vietnam Veterans Memorial Center. This is an issue of interest, and so I think we'll be watching that one closely. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Schuyler? Mr. May.
I have a couple of additions. There were also bills passed in the last Congress authorizing the National Liberty Memorial, which is a revived version of the Black Revolutionary War Patriots Memorial, which the authority for which expired. Yes, it's signed into law. And then the other one that was signed into law, and I think this was actually in the defense bill, was the Gold Star Mothers.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Which was authorized as well. And if you need any, we can send information on both of those. There are a couple other memorial-related bills that have dropped as well. A World War I memorial. I mean, there was a previous one that was passed in the last Congress that excluded the establishment of the memorial in the district, and then now there's a new one that's dropped that actually does place that. It does authorize that, or rather that's what they're proposing.
It's interesting. My analysis shows them as identical, and my thought process was that the one was introduced because the president took a while for him to sign it. In fact, he signed it the day that the new one was introduced. But the past law does allow for this memorial. No? Okay.
My understanding is that the Senate dropped the provision for the memorial entirely, and then the Senate ratified the House ratified the Senate's version. This is what I've been told from our research. And then there were other ones that have been introduced. Desert Storm Memorial was reintroduced, and I'm just going off the top of my head, but there's at least one more. So.
Oh, the Korean War
Veterans
Wall of Remembrance was introduced too. Yes.
Right. Okay.
Thank you. And Mr. Hart?
Was there a site specified for the World War I memorial?
My understanding, it's not a specific site, but it's just a half an acre. It was allowed to be on the mall, but it could not interfere with the District of Columbia World War I memorial.
Other questions or comments? Thank you. Agenda item number 4 is the consent calendar, and there are only 3 items on it. Agenda item number 4A is the new commissary at Fort Belvoir. 4B is the Navy Lodge at the Naval Support Activity Bethesda. And 4C is a text amendment to the Reed Cook overlay. Any questions on either of these three items? Hearing none, is there a motion on the consent agenda?
Motion.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. It's passed. Thank you. Agenda item number 5A is the site improvement to the perimeter security at the Department of Commerce at the Hoover Building, and we have Mr. Hart. Welcome.
I thought they were only going to show those people.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the Commission. The project before you today is the site improvements and perimeter security for the Herbert Hoover Building, which is the headquarters for the Department of Commerce. This project was submitted by the General Services Administration, and it is a revised concept site development plan. The previous concept was reviewed by the Commission in April of 2012. The Hoover Building was completed in 1932, and at that time it was considered the largest office building in the world. The Hoover Building forms the western leg of the Federal Triangle. It is one of the longest blocks in the city at nearly a quarter of a mile. It is bounded on the east and west by 14th Street and 15th Street, on the north and south by Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue. 14th Street and 15th Streets are major commuter routes into and out of the city. They are also major north-south pedestrian corridors linking the downtown, the White House Visitor Center, which you see here on the upper right, the National Aquarium, the National Museum of African American History and Culture, the Washington Monument, and the National Mall. Here are a few images of the existing conditions for pedestrian environment around the building. What you'll notice is that there are long sidewalks with equally long lines of planters. In 2001, the Commission approved the installation of these planters as a security measure for a period not to exceed 18 months. The planters aren't particularly attractive, but they do provide a sense of separation and protection for pedestrians along the busy thoroughfares surrounding the building. You'll also note that the trees are a mix, with both some being healthy and some being not so healthy. Also, the planting strips will need to be rehabilitated. You may note that there really isn't any seating really surrounding the building, with the exception of along Pennsylvania Avenue, where there are a few benches. So all in all, this is not a very inviting pedestrian-friendly location. In April of 2006, the Commission reviewed concept site and building plans for the modernization of the Hoover Building, and these included a proposal for perimeter security made up of granite-clad bollards and raised planter beds approximately 4 feet from the curb. This alignment is shown here in red. This was not consistent with the Commission's policies adopted in 2005 that stated when the building yard is 20 feet or more away from the building, perimeter security elements should be placed within the building yard. The Commission commented favorably on the site and building plans with the exception of the perimeter security and streetscape elements, and recommended that the design of those elements be coordinated as part of a comprehensive design solution for the entire Federal Triangle. In April of last year, the Commission reviewed a revised concept for perimeter security in which the majority of the elements were located at the edge of the building yard. This was consistent with the Commission policies regarding the placement of perimeter security elements, and the Commission commented favorably on this concept. In further development of the design, however, GSA determined that the conditions of this site warranted a reconsideration of the design. Specifically, the exceptional length of the block meant that any design that kept to the edge of the building yard would seem monotonous. The volume of vehicular traffic on 14th and 15th Streets degraded the pedestrian experience, particularly in areas where there was no parking to provide a buffer. Judicial placement of some of the streetscape elements between pedestrians and vehicles could enhance the pedestrian experience, but as long as all of the perimeter security was kept within the building yard, no funds would be used to make improvements to the public right-of-way. GSA has therefore submitted a revised concept that it believes will enhance the public realm in this area, but that is currently inconsistent with the Commission policies against the location of security elements in the public right-of-way. Now, the changes that GSA is submitting include realignment of the portion of the perimeter security line from the building yard to the inside edge of the tree planting strip. You see the red lines here, so that's where the revised design is showing. Providing public seating for tourists and commuters along 14th Street and 15th Street. These are the purple areas that are shown here. Eliminating the need for bollards in the sidewalk by using collapsible concrete, and I'll show this a little bit later. Also providing space for capital bike share stations along 15th Street at the north and south ends of the block. And these are shown here. Incorporating low impact development elements along some of the tree planting areas, shown here in dark green. And then finally, incorporating security elements into raised planters at the main entrance of the building, which is shown here in a light green color. And also relocating the ADA accessibility ramps around them. This concept design for the areas along Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenues remains essentially the same as what the Commission reviewed back in April of 2012. So the remainder of my presentation will focus on what has changed. So this slide illustrates the changes between the 2012 concept and the current submission by highlighting the areas where the security elements are being relocated into public space. These are highlighted in yellow. While what you will need to decide today is whether the benefits of this particular design justify the departure from the Commission's policies regarding security elements in public space. This is a close-up of one of the areas where the security line was moved out to the edge of the tree box. This particular image shows 14th Street near its intersection with Constitution Avenue. The tree box itself will be reconstructed to incorporate low-impact design features to capture stormwater, and the existing trees and soil will be replaced. Bike racks are also included at the end of the tree boxes on the north and south ends of the block. A cable rail system will provide appropriately rated perimeter security at the edge between the tree box and the sidewalk. Seating areas within the building yard can be used by both tourists and commuters. There are several commuter bus and metro bus stops in this area, as well as 2 slug lines. GSA is exploring the possibility of using collapsible concrete on the sidewalk where the security line crosses the sidewalk. There are some technical issues that need to be resolved, but this would eliminate the need for bollards crossing the sidewalk. And they're shown here in kind of the brownish color. This is a close-up of the 15th Street near Pennsylvania Avenue. This design, the design elements are essentially the same as along 14th Street, but instead of the bike racks near the tree boxes, the plan shows capital bike share stations here and at the other end of 15th Street, which are the north and south ends. And this is just on the bottom left is a section showing the building yard and then the sidewalk with the perimeter security element here, and then the low impact development located here. At the main entrance along at 14th Street, the primary difference between the previous design and the current one is the introduction of 2 raised planter beds located on flanking the main entrance, which is here. And they would incorporate the security elements. And you'll note in the section in this page, on this slide, the security element is integrated into the design, and it's adjacent to the sidewalk. So staff evaluation of this project was based on policies in the comprehensive plan for the National Capital, the Monumental Core Framework Plan, and the policies and objectives that were adopted in 2005 as an addendum to the Urban Design and Security Plan. The most significant of these is probably the last of these plans, which includes the objective to strike a balance between the physical perimeter security and the vitality of the public realm. This proposal is generally consistent with policies outlined in the comprehensive plan regarding the rehabilitation of existing federal facilities, support for bicycle use by both government employees and visitors, and enhancement of the settings of historic buildings. It is not consistent with policies that, excuse me, that call for consistency with the objectives and policies of the Urban Design and Security Plan, however. I will discuss that more in a minute. The design generally supports one of the key proposals of the Monumental Core Framework Plan, which is to link downtown with the National Mall by improving the pedestrian experience in the Federal Triangle. The inclusion of bike share stations, enhanced landscaping, and seating areas all support this objective. The proposal is inconsistent with two of the three policies here, and it may be inconsistent with the third. For existing buildings in urban areas, perimeter security barriers should be located within the building yard when the size of the yard is greater than or equal to 20 feet. If less than 20 feet, the barriers may be located in public space. Excuse me. The revised concept design is not in conformance with this policy in certain areas. These areas of nonconformance occur along 14th and 15th Streets, which I showed in an earlier slide. An example of that is shown here, highlighted in yellow, where the building yard is 27 feet. While staff is not making an unfavorable recommendation in this case, it is important that the Commission be aware of this policy. Excuse me. Okay. The placement of security barriers in public space is discouraged and should be minimized. While the 2012 proposal was in full compliance with this policy, the current proposal is not. It does, however, represent a significant minimization from what was proposed in 2006, which I also showed earlier. Staff recommends, however, that the applicant continue to look for ways to further minimize intrusion of the security elements in public space by designing those elements in a way that is in keeping with the existing local and federal streetscape design guidelines, and by coordinating with the District of Department of Transportation. Excuse me, District of Columbia Department of Transportation. And finally, with the location of perimeter security barriers should minimize interruption of pedestrian circulation. Barriers should not unduly cross sidewalks perpendicularly, causing pedestrians to maneuver between them. While the current design is in conformance with this policy, staff notes that there are unresolved issues that may preclude the use of this technology and result in the need for bollards to be used in the sidewalk, and this should be avoided. And with that, Mr. Chairman, the Executive Director's recommendation is that the Commission note that the Commission policy stating that for existing buildings in urban areas, perimeter security barriers should be located within the building yard when the face of the sensitive building to the outside edge of the building yard is a minimum of 20 feet. Note that the proposed perimeter security elements located along Pennsylvania Avenue and Constitution Avenue are consistent with this policy and have not significantly changed from what was proposed in April of last year. Note that the proposed perimeter security elements that are in public space along 14th Street and 15th Street are not consistent with this policy. And note that the unique site conditions, that being a significant increase in pedestrian traffic from 3 tourist destinations opening in close proximity to this site, and both 14th and 15th Streets being nearly 1,200-foot long blocks, may justify an exception in this case. And therefore, agree to consider a partial exception to this policy for the perimeter security elements located in public space on the condition that the applicant is able to demonstrate in future submissions that the public benefits provided outweigh the impact of the security elements in public space by complying with the policy stated that where security barriers in public space cannot be avoided, they should be integrated into the urban landscape in a manner that minimizes their visual impact and physical infringement into public space, supporting the recommendations of the Monumental Core Framework Plan by improving the pedestrian experience along Pennsylvania Avenue and the Federal Triangle through the provision of seating and shade and plantings that provide seasonal interest, and by enhancing perceived safety through the provision of pedestrian-oriented lighting and protection from vehicular traffic. Further supporting the recommendations of the Monumental Core Framework Plan by introducing sustainable public spaces through the use of low-impact design to capture and mitigate stormwater runoff, providing a pedestrian environment that is free from obstruction by eliminating barriers that cross the pedestrian path, ensuring that pavement materials and streetscape elements are consistent as appropriate with the design guidelines for Pennsylvania Avenue, the Mall Streetscape Plan, and the District of Columbia Streetscape Design Guidelines. And finally, coordinating elements in public space with the District of Columbia's Department of Transportation. And with that, I conclude my presentation.
Are there questions for Mr. Hart or comments, Mr. May?
I have comments that I'll hold for the moment, but I have questions, or a question with regard to the statement in the EDR about Commission of Fine Arts. As I recall, Commission of Fine Arts approved the previous concept and delegated staff for final.
Yes.
And has there been feedback yet from CFA staff to indicate that the full commission will need to review this again?
Yeah, we have had informal consultation with staff, and we will be resubmitting for a new concept design. But the staff comments were very favorable. Can I say a couple of things by way of context? Or would you like to ask your other questions?
I just had one other question.
Please.
Which is, was there ever any consideration to modify the driveways? They're just, those sets of 3 driveways that are in 2 places on each side of the building? Was that ever part of it?
There was not to my recollection that there was.
Modify, like move them?
Modify, as in, like, I mean, right now, there are significant detrimental effect on the public space, on the sidewalk space, by having that huge curb cut for 3 driveways all next to each other.
On 15th, or,
When I looked at the plan, they were on both sides
Yeah.
in 2 different locations.
right, okay.
And they were just huge, and huge curb cuts like that are something to generally be avoided. And I just didn't know whether it was ever taken into consideration modifying that in some fashion to
Not yet.
reduce
but
that
we-
impact on
But we
public
can
space.
look at it in design development, yes. I wanted to say a couple of things to explain a little bit why we would undertake what seems a fool's errand and have concept approval in hand and not just run with it. And there's a very good reason. Carlton has explained much of it, but the design as it developed became unwieldy. And despite the best efforts of our architects, this is really, truly, I believe, if there ever was an exception, this is a building that has earned it. We got into a lengthy debate about how to solve the problem of monotony. And so while it's being framed up, and I understand that from a policy standpoint, I would just like to say one more time that policy is only as good as the physical product that it manifests. And in this case, the product was of such low quality for all of us. We just felt like it was deteriorating the further we got into it. So it was time to hit a reset button. So I appreciate your flexibility in from a policy standpoint and just your willingness to look at it. The Department of Commerce should be acknowledged too for their remarkable patience. This has been a process that has been ongoing for many years, and this is just the most recent chapter. I would like to say a couple of things too about the actual where we are in the process. We are very aware that we have a lot of work to do on the design yet. It is still in development. We are, there is some urgency, however, in determining the location of the perimeter, because this is stimulus money and we are working backwards from a September 14 deadline for expensing the money. So we have to know where it's going. We can start work in time if we know where the perimeter is going to be located with the underground elements, and even while we're continuing to design what's above ground. So that is why this has been somewhat urgent. And again, I think one of the things that inspired us to go on this detour is because we've heard a lot in the design community about making perimeter security disappear. We spend a lot of time fretting and wringing our hands about why we need to have it in the first place, and it seems a debate that we need to stop expending energy on at this point. Perimeter security is a fact of 21st century life, and why not look at it from a different point of view and say, perhaps it can be designed in a way that improves the pedestrian experience. There's no place in Washington that needs it more than this. In fact, the bike stations at either end of the block, I mean, I can imagine on a hot day getting on a bike at the bike share and riding a quarter of a mile down and dropping it off again. There's no place where the pedestrian experience feels more like something you need to endure than outside the park, the Department of Commerce right now. So the public realm and the pedestrian experience is something that we really are seeking to improve with this very functional security element. So again, and I will be asking for a couple of wordsmithing changes, but I'll come back to you with that.
Okay. Mr. Dragoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say, you know how much I hate security in the public space, and how frequently that's an objection or conversation that we have in this room. But I will say that, you know, given the huge expanse that is commerce, given the site constraints that are considerable, given the monotony bordering on banality of the design that resulted, that I think that this is a pretty good solution, and that I really appreciate how hard GSA and Commerce worked with the Office of Planning and with our Department of Transportation and the Public Space Committee to come up with this design, and the amenities that they provided, especially the green infrastructure that will help us with stormwater, and we're really thrilled about the bike share station. So I would just like to say that I very much endorse the executive director's recommendation and would like to so move it at this time, if that's appropriate, not to preclude any further discussion, though.
It's been moved and
Second.
seconded, and we can continue on with other discussion.
Chairman, I also want to indicate my appreciation for the seating. I'm always trying to get this security to be useful, and this is an area that really would accommodate all your, a lot of traffic, a lot of tourists walking, you know, in this area, and even the employees at Commerce. I think when lunchtime they can come out and sit if there's places to be seated. So anywhere they can include any kind of seating or tables and things that would be very, very useful. And I think we've discovered with our toolkit, I think, that there are a lot of things that can be done that can be secure for security that replace all the ballots. So I'm glad they've done that, and I agree kind of with the question about the curve cut. That's a very broad area on both sides. I spend a lot of time around that building, and I know people in the district building do too. So it just seems kind of unusual to have so much space to have cars come in. And I don't know if this is off the subject, but I cannot understand their parking there. They have cars just stacked up in that parking lot. And I don't know whether or not they're in compliance with the parking and all that. We have guidelines for transportation, but it's a madhouse in there. And I hope they don't ever have to get out of there quickly in their cars, because cars are just lined up in there and parked in every different way, which kind of surprises me a lot of times. Thank you for their work, and I agree that it's a great move forward.
Mr. Prevention.
A few comments. On the issue of the rapidity with which we have looked at this, it looks like we first saw this project in March of '06, so this is practically fast-tracked.
We aim to please, Bradley.
There's been a couple of comments about banal design and monotonous design and so forth, which may be our perspective at this time. According to the notes from our April meeting of last year, we actually commended GSA for developing a design for perimeter security that is well integrated and so forth. So a small change in our perspective, perhaps. It's difficult, I think, to have a security project that is functional and yet is also architecturally interesting as opposed to being monotonous, but that's in the eye of the beholder. On the issue of precedent, if the city has no problem with selective encroachment. There was some terminology that was used about when we ask for exceptions, they are discouraged and minimized. It appears that this new design does that. It doesn't entirely waive the entire security perimeter, but only selected portions of the interior. At that April meeting last year, there was more than a dozen recommendations from the NCPC to GSA. I think they have all been addressed. The changes in the design, the additional seating, the others have commented on, the relooking at the vehicle barriers, and on and on and on. So I think that GSA has more than that, if not exceeded the requests and the recommendations from the previous meeting. So we could commend staff on the analysis and I think easily support the executive director's recommendation. Thank you.
Mr. May.
I think what, sorry.
Mr. May, then Mr. Hart, I'm sorry.
So this is going to be fun. I get to be the contrarian this time around instead of Mina. No, but not really. Not really. No, my observations on this are first of all, I agree wholeheartedly that we should not be sticking so strictly to the design guidelines for perimeter security elements that we wind up forcing ourselves into accepting bad solutions, design solutions. So I'm all for the idea that you could actually get a superior solution with a little bit more flexibility. It makes perfect sense to me. And I appreciate the way the staff has worked on this to try to make it something so that we could approve it within the guidelines that we have set for ourselves. The thing that I'm not convinced of, and I don't necessarily need to see it today, is that I don't see what we're getting. I mean, I really have not seen enough of this design to understand that there really is a substantial benefit. What I see is one section of wall on 4 sides of it that's moved closer to the curb. I mean, yeah, you get bike share stations out of it, but you could get bike share stations a lot of different ways, and that didn't seem to be inherently tied to that strategy of moving the wall out. It makes the wall a lot more present from the street. I mean, yes, it does make it less relentless as you walk along it. You don't have that same feature all the way along. And maybe this really is the only strategy for doing that. But I just don't see enough to say that this is really so superior as a design solution that it's worth bending the rules in this case. I'm certainly willing to be convinced, and some of the other, if there are other benefits that come with it that I'm not seeing, I'd like to know more about those. For example, there was a reference in the report about the large flows of people that are going to be walking down there. Is this house somehow going to make it better and easier for those people to to walk there? Is the sidewalk going to be wider, or is it going to be wider at certain sections that are, things like that? I just don't see enough of it to be convinced that it makes complete sense. But as I said, I'm willing to be convinced of that. Certainly a review by the full Commission of Fine Arts, who I imagine will get into this in fine detail, will be helpful in being convinced of this, because I would certainly defer to their judgment from an aesthetic point of view. I'm frankly a little bit surprised that Commissioner Trigoni jumped on the bandwagon so quickly. So clearly she must see something of great benefit here. So again, another reason to be willing to be convinced, but again, I haven't seen it yet. The only other thing I would mention is the caution about the reliance on collapsible concrete or collapsible sidewalks, because we investigated that quite thoroughly and found enough issues that we could not rely on it, and so we did not use it. And if everybody is imagining that this is going to work because that's available as a technology, I'm not. We just need to bear in mind that it might not work from a security point of view. I mean, one of the problems that we had, I don't think you have this issue, but we couldn't use it because we have mounted police, and the point load from a horse is enough to cause the problems with the sidewalk. So now.
So is this an invitation that you would like me to accept and address right now? Or would you?
You want to convince me with your words?
No,
about
not
things-
really. I mean, so you're
No,
not
I'm
asking
happy
me to
I'm
do
happy
that
go,
now, are
go
you?
forward and see it at some
Okay,
future
good.
point.
Yeah, well,
That's,
good.
that's fine enough. And again, if it goes, if it sails through the Commission of Fine Arts and they, and that's reflected in the next report, that's certainly very helpful in understanding that it's met those,
Okay.
that standard. I don't see it with what I have here is all.
On the collapsible concrete, I think there's a couple of companies that promote the use of, in certain applications with some success that we might consult. Rogers Marble is one. I think they've used it extensively throughout Manhattan. And I believe the Weidlinger folks have also touted that as an approach.
That's exactly what we
It would
have.
be interesting to see what they're.
That's exactly what we have examined. We looked at the Rogers Marble work extensively when we looked at this. And we may have information that we could share with you about that. That would be helpful.
That would be lovely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mr. Hart and then Mr. Wells.
Yeah. With the matter before us, I'm not troubled at all by making some exceptions, and I think that the design guidelines were worded carefully in the use of the word should and, to the least extent possible. It allows alternate ways of handling security that would allow some deviation from those rules. And I applaud GSA for recognizing that the solution they're embarking on could end up being less than stellar. And this opens up the opportunity to make some improvements in the public realm, which in a quarter of a mile are probably well-deserved. So like Mr. May, I'm curious to see how this collapsible concrete solution works out. It would be great to have something without physical barriers in the public right-of-way. So we'll look forward to the detailed design.
On the issue of precedents, some folks might see that as a slippery slope. Are we anywhere near overturning the existing policy? Do we get 10 exceptions before we? I don't. As I recall, we're not anywhere near this. And again, we have some unique conditions, I think, that would justify.
There's a long list of conditions.
If it is a slippery slope, I'm looking forward to sliding down it myself someday.
Mr. Wells.
Has there been, a couple questions, has there been any discussion with WMATA around, the bus stop there right now is just a steel pole with a steel flag, and it's probably going to be an increasingly important bus stop. Is there an accommodation of creating a quality place for bus stop?
We have not talked to WMATA as yet, but that certainly can come in design development if there needs to be a bus shelter or something.
Or DDOT, has a role, really, I guess, mostly in the.
It would be.
But if there's some type of shelter that is consistent with the design that you're proposing, so it's not just an appendage, might be good if that's actually incorporated in a way to create a welcoming, nice, sheltered place. The second question, from what I can tell on page 15, if I understand it right, is that you're creating conversational type seating, which I really like. I hate the linear seating all across the city, but am I right that you're creating conversational type seating with that?
Yes, we're still working out. This is very broad brush. But yes, and the renderings are a little heavy on the landscape, on the foliage around the conversation areas. But yes, that's the idea. That especially on the 15th Street side, aside from the tourists who must wend their way down from the White House Visitor Center, there's also, as anyone who's been in the neighborhood knows, a line of food trucks that is generally speaking parked on the 15th Street side. So the idea is to give the employees of the Department of Commerce a place to have lunch.
And is that, it's hard for me to tell, and I don't want to presume to be your landscape or your architect on this, but was that a possibility on the 14th Street side as well?
Yeah, we have a little bit less building yard to play with, but yes, that's the idea. I think there's two schools of thought. One school would say that strangers are uncomfortable sitting facing one another, but maybe we should just push that a little, right?
Well-
And strangers might get to like each other.
Well, creating, public spaces, again, where people encounter each other is, again, it creates more of a place, especially if people are going to be eating outside.
Right.
And that works. Then the other question would be if there's a tree or two envisioned, so there'd be shade
Yes.
for those areas.
The tree canopy, the trees are in pretty bad shape.
Okay.
And if we go into public space, then GSA can address the low-impact development, the tree pits. There's some pretty poor conditions. If we stay in the building yard, we really have no business touching it.
And then just overall concept, I think what Peter May brought up in terms of these long planters or raised planters beds, that they can, in the walls, can create some sense of isolation along there, but in return is that we're getting these large pedestrian pathways because people will be going down to the new museum down there. Is that the idea?
Yes, and the aquarium, which it will be on the
Okay,
Constitution Avenue elevation.
Okay.
Yes.
thank you.
A follow-on comment about the conversational seating. Anything the city can do, as there was a recent survey that we were the third rudest major city after Boston and New York.
The third what?
Third rudest,
Rudest.
most rude.
The DC government officials are doing what they can to alleviate and mitigate that issue. That's why I brought it up.
And the conversational seating might help with that.
Mr. Miller.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I just wanted also to commend GSA and Commerce on all the public space improvements, the benches, the plantings, the low-impact development. Certainly a huge improvement over the temporary potted planters that have been there for 12 years.
18 years.
But I do share some of Mr. May's concern. I would looking at that rendering on page 9 of the perimeter security that is encroaching in the public space. I would have liked to see, I guess, more of a illustration of how that's going to all look going down the entire street, and how it would have looked if you had put the perimeter security where the policy calls for it to be on the other side in the building yard. I think it seems to me that you might have been able to get all of these public improvements, maybe with some more monotony, but it does seem to highlight the highway that's going to be that's the framing of all the cars that are in that street. So I think I have some concern about the encroachment in public space, but I certainly commend you on all the improvements that and benches and plantings that you're proposing there. Oh, I have one question about the collapsible sidewalks. So the alternative is the bollards. Is that the backup position?
The alternative is that we would have to put one or possibly two, depending on where the width of the sidewalk ends up, at the pinches, in 4 different places on each side.
And the collapsible is something that some security officer would activate at appropriate times,
No,
or
it's weight triggered.
it's weight triggered by the
Peter's
by the
pointing out
vehicle,
horse.
the vehicle.
Yeah.
I see.
It's kind of, that's one I hadn't heard yet
Okay.
about the horses.
Thank you.
Mr. Goning.
Just to address Commissioner May's comments, just very briefly, I don't want to be accused of enthusiasm or too much enthusiasm, but we do look at it as a real trade-off. And I will say that the city puts all kinds of stuff in public space, right? All kinds of things. We talked about bike stations, bike racks, parking facilities, art, signs, etc. What we really hate is security elements that are only security elements, right? So we put stuff in the public space all the time. What Commerce has done is they've put something in the public space that looks like it's naturally associated with the LID features. It looks like it's something that's part of that low-impact development, which, by the way, is collecting stormwater not just from the building, but from the street, right? So it's providing a real benefit, and so that's why it's not so objectionable to the city, because it looks like it has a function other than just providing security. We're also, I hope, being clear that it's a kind of a quid pro quo, right? Having the collapsible pavement is a big part of and if that's a contingency, that's an important thing for us, that we much prefer the collapsible sidewalk to the bollards, and that's partially why we're being a little bit more forgiving about the other security elements in public space. I should mention that we have an issue with the fountains at the entrance, and I know that
They're gone.
They're gone. Okay, good. But I know that there's an alternative potentially that involves a tunnel that could affect the collapsible elements. So this is all still a work in progress, but I think this nicely memorializes at least the trade-offs that we see being acceptable, and I'll just make that point again. We don't hate security. We don't hate stuff in the public space. We hate things that are security only in the public space. And so we have lots of things that we need to get accomplished in our public space, and this is an instance where the design is proposing to accomplish some of the things that we find very laudable, and so that's why we're happy with this design.
Can I follow on that very quickly? I think one of the things that I'm lacking in this is that I don't see how that barrier that's been moved out toward the street really does integrate with the LID features. So maybe and it may just be a lack of really good drawings that show it or whatever. To me, it looks like a wall next to a tree pit.
We went light on the design details, because they're not near we're working on the fence forms and all of that.
Right.
But we're really seeking approval of the location only at this point, because and if we had more time, we would have taken more time to have the design more developed at this point, even for concept, but the location is paramount right now for us to be able to pull this off.
Okay. I will note that there's still more road to travel on this. We still have the preliminary and final building and site plans to go. So there's more to do on this 7-year discussion. But the question before us today in the EDR is an exception to the perimeter security policy with conditions as enumerated. Sensing no further discussions, tell me there's more discussion.
No discussion, just I would like to wordsmith just a
Oh, that's right, I'm
tiny
sorry.
bit.
You did have amendments.
In two places. And maybe, Anne, you can explain this to me, but it gives me the heebie-jeebies, this one word where it says agrees to consider. We would strike the word consider and agrees to a partial exception. We're going to be continuing design development based on the notion that an exception awaits us, and it feels an uncomfortable loophole. That's number one. And number two is the fourth bullet under that same section. Likewise, we are pursuing the collapsible sidewalk solution, but in good faith, if we can't do it for technical reasons or it's a budget buster, I cannot promise elimination of bollards that cross the pedestrian path, and we would suggest instead that bullet read, providing a pedestrian environment that is as free as possible from obstruction by minimizing bollards that cross the pedestrian path, using the same words that you use in the first, is it the first bullet where you talk about minimizing visual impact.
So is as free as possible from from obstruction.
by minimizing instead of eliminating.
You want to move those in a block?
I would like to move those changes to the EDR.
Is there a second? And for discussion, again, striking, consider, and then inserting in those words at the bottom, the fourth bullet. Any discussion on those amendments?
Yes. I don't have any problem with the modification of the bullet with regard to the bollards, because that was what I was warning of. But agrees to consider a partial exception. I actually liked that language because agreeing to a partial exception, I mean, this is just comments on, this is not an approval action, and I just didn't think it would be appropriate to bind future decision-making by making something so definitive by saying, we agree to an exception if the following conditions are made.
Well, okay, so look at it from our point of view. We're looking at spending a lot of money going in this direction. And if I were my lawyer, I'd be looking at this and saying, you continued for 6 months on the agreement to consider, right? I mean, that, and
I understand
you
completely.
we still have the ability to say no at preliminary and final. So I'm thinking like a lawyer.
Right. So am I. That's the problem.
Okay,
We're not lawyers.
So can you pick one or the other? You can either consider and eliminate, or I'm sorry, consider and minimize, or agree and eliminate. How about that?
Okay, well, that will have to be your motion, because I'm a stubborn kind of gal. I'm asking for both in my motion, please.
Yeah, I just want to say one more thing on this, which is that I've been, I've gone through a number of experiences with NCPC where what is said in these early moments winds up coming back and making life difficult, and I think that I know this may seem like I'm arguing in your favor, but I'm actually not. I'm arguing that that the commission have freedom in the future. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I don't feel very strongly about it. But I would prefer to keep the word consider.
The substitute motion could be in order to sever so we'd have two separate votes, but. Is there a substitute motion, or do we proceed?
I mean, the motion maker would have to accept it. She indicated she didn't want to accept it.
Okay, we'll proceed in a block and vote it up or down. Yep. All in favor of the amendments as has been described, both sets of amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. You have your amendments.
Thank you.
The EDR before us as amended, the EDR as amended is before us. Is there a motion on the EDR as amended? So it's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no. Passed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 5B is the Intelligence Security Command Expansion, Phase 1 at Fort Belvoir. And we have Ms. Kelly. Wounded.
Good afternoon. Today before you is the Phase 1 of the Intelligence and Security Command Expansion at Fort Belvoir. I will refer to the Intelligence and Security Command as INSCOM throughout this presentation. Here you can see the existing location of INSCOM on the north post of Fort Belvoir. It is located south of the intersection of Beulah Street and John J. Kingman Road. To the west is the Defense Logistics Agency, and in close proximity is the PX and Commissary and the Museum of the Army projects. The main employee entrance on this part of the installation is off of Fairfax County Parkway and John J. Kingman Road. Here you can see a closer view of the current conditions on the site. It has a single building on the south of the site with surface parking on the east and north of the site. Due to the agency, it has its own secure perimeter around the installation. And you access the secure perimeter off of Beulah Street in this location. Outside the secure perimeter is a visitor's parking lot. Also in this image you can see on the east is a wildlife corridor that connects to another wildlife corridor north of John J. Kingman Road. This wildlife corridor will not be developed in and kind of hems in the development at INSCOM. So you can see a proposed rendering of the expansion project. It is proposed to occur over 4 phases. It includes the renovation of the existing building, which is kind of in the center here, and the addition to the building, which kind of hugs the existing building, as well as site improvements such as this parking garage. The expansion project allows 890 employees to be moved to INSCOM. These employees are located in lease space in Fairfax County or in other buildings at Fort Belvoir, and the move allows for greater security and collaboration between the employees, as well as there's overcrowding in the existing building, so that the expansion will alleviate that. And the building was built in the 80s and doesn't currently meet code for security or the technological needs of INSCOM. But what we're looking at here today is just phase 1, which is parking and site improvements. So you can see here the proposed parking numbers. After the expansion, there will be an additional 1,051 parking spaces on site. Of those, 716 will be for employees. Due to Army regulations, the Army is only proposing to provide 60% of employees with parking. So this is within the range of the comprehensive plan ratio, which allows 50 to 66%. As I indicated before, we're only seeing the site plan today, which you can see on the screen. I will walk through the major elements of the site plan in the next couple slides. The first major element is a parking garage in the northeast. It is 5 stories tall and can accommodate 1,421 parking spaces. The building will be a precast concrete, but you can see here in this rendering that the stairwells will have this glass and metal material. There are 2 stairwells, one in this location and one in this location, both facing the existing building. What parking cannot be accommodated in the parking garage will be accommodated in a surface parking lot. There will be 316 parking spaces in the lot, and it will be constructed of porous concrete, which you can see a detail of that here. The drive aisles will be asphalt, but the parking stalls themselves will be porous concrete, and this is what is located throughout Fort Belvoir. And on the west of the site, is a new entry control point. The access point to INSCOM has not changed, just the security elements. So there'll be a new guard booth, a new security fence, and a new pedestrian access point. And here in the site plan, you can see how the parking lot has been laid out to allow for large landscaping beds for trees and landscaping, as well as the beds allow for displays. So in this location is a airplane display, such as a cannon display in this location, and a few memorials. But the landscaping beds also allow for some rain gardens, which you can see a detail of one here. There are 4 rain gardens to handle some storm water on the site. And in addition to the porous concrete in the parking lot, there'll be a rain harvesting system next to the parking garage located here, and as well as grass swales, and the existing retention pond will be retrofitted to handle stormwater. The project meets all stormwater requirements, including ESA 438, and we, as part of the project, staff has referred the project to Fairfax County, and their stormwater group has reviewed the stormwater techniques on site and commended the Army for these techniques. Off-site, the Army is proposing to create a new right-hand only lane on Beulah Street connecting to John J. Kingman to improve the intersection flow in this location, as well as the Army is proposing a new sidewalk from John J. Kingman down to INSCOM. Currently, there is no sidewalk, so this improves pedestrian flow in this location. Overall, staff is supportive of Phase 1 of the project. It has positive aspects such as a multi-level parking garage, porous concrete, rain gardens, and a rain harvesting system. We do have a few comments regarding the parking garage location and pedestrian elements of the site. Here again, you can see the location of the parking garage in the northeast corner of the site. And this is a tree removal plan for the project. And you can see here also in this location is a drive aisle for the parking garage, as well as a fire safety drive. You can see the proposed trees removed as a result of the parking garage location. In 2002, the Department of Defense revised its ATFP standards, which allows parking to be located closer to the building. So we encourage the Army to evaluate moving this parking closer to retain as many trees in this location as possible. These trees are located adjacent to the wildlife corridor, and so we're encouraging their retention. I would like to note that any trees removed as part of this project will be replaced at a 2-to-1 ratio near the project site. Regarding the TMP, as required by NCPC guidelines, the Army has submitted a TMP, which staff has found very informative and well organized. However, the TMP we received was a draft May 2012 date, and some things such as parking numbers have changed since then, so we just encourage a final TMP submission. Also, we have comments regarding the goals and objective section of the TMP, which we encourage the Army to reevaluate, to provide timelines and matrix to allow for evaluation of the TMP programs to see if they're working, as well as monitoring these programs throughout the life of the TMP. We also request that there is a parking phasing plan within the TMP. So Phase 1 includes all the parking for the site prior to the moving of the 890 employees to the site. So we encourage the Army to evaluate ways to limit the parking supply prior to full move-in of employees to be in compliance with the comprehensive plan ratio. Lastly, we encourage the Army to evaluate bicycle and pedestrian amenities. First of all, there you can see on the screen an existing bus route from the Franconia Metro Station down to Fort Belvoir. This is called the Eagle Express. It is operated by Fairfax County. And one of the comments we received from Fairfax County is that the Army should evaluate whether or not the existing route will be sufficient to service INSCOM, or whether or not an additional leg to the bus route is necessary. So we encourage the Army to evaluate that. Lastly, we encourage the Army to evaluate bicycle amenities. Here you can see the existing condition of Beulah Street. And as the Army is going to restripe the street and add an additional lane, we encourage them to evaluate a bike lane. Many of the roads on Fort Belvoir, as part of the BRAC process, the roads have been expanded, and many of those include bike lanes, and we encourage the continuation of this throughout Fort Belvoir.
Ms. Kelly, before you go on,
Yep.
I noted Fairfax had encouraged a bus loop near Beulah, and I can't tell from them. Has that been acted upon, or?
No, this is the current bus route, and Beulah is kind of like right in this location.
All right.
So it goes on John J. Kingman now.
They had noted they recommended a bus loop be provided at or near the Beulah Street entrance.
Right, so
Is that there, or not?
there's not one now.
Okay. Is there plans to consider that further, or do you know?
That's what we're encouraging the Army to evaluate.
Okay, I haven't looked, right, sorry.
That's fine. So with that, it's the Executive Director's recommendation that the Commission approve the preliminary site and building plans for Phase 1 of the INSCOM expansion. Recommends prior to submitting final site and building plans, the applicant evaluate moving the parking garage closer to the building. A bus route and bus shelter location in cooperation with Fairfax County, and bicycle amenities. Request that the applicant provide the following at final review: responses to Fairfax County, VDOT, and NCPC's comments, and a final TMP that reflects current conditions and information. The TMP should also include stated goals and objectives with timelines, a description of the process for monitoring and evaluating the achievement of goals and objectives, and a phasing plan for employee parking availability. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
All right, thank you. Questions for Ms. Kelly?
Question.
Mr. Hart?
The comprehensive plan referenced in the staff review is which plan?
The current one, but it will also meet the future transportation element parking ratio.
I understood that Fort Belvoir does not yet have a current comprehensive plan,
Master plan?
master plan.
They have one from 1993.
And so what is a comprehensive plan?
I'm talking about the federal elements of NCPC's comprehensive plan.
Okay, NCPC's comprehensive
Yes,
plan. Is the TMP draft that was used in this one that is a post-wide TMP, or is it a project-specific?
Project specific. Site specific. For the site, so it will include the employees that are on the site now as well.
And am I also correct that the current parking ratio for the employees is 40%, and it'll be moving up to 60% in this plan?
It's about 49%, and it will be moving up to 60. The Army has evaluated their parking supply at the site, and the employees are having difficulty finding parking or ways to get to the site. So they are moving up to the 60, which is still within the comprehensive plan ratio.
The TMP, as I understand it, was not intended to be used on individual buildings as much as for an entire installation.
Right, well, the master plan will have a overall TMP for the installation of Fort Belvoir, but Fort Belvoir has over, and I'm going to ask Chris if I get this wrong, about 142 tenants. And so each building will have a TMP as well that will try and reach the goals of their overall TMP. So they'll get more site-specific based on where you are on Fort Belvoir.
Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Kelly?
Ask this question. This is the same Fort Belvoir, right? Where we've been asking for the master plan. Anyone want to give me an update on where that master plan is and why we're looking at another proposal without a master plan?
Last I heard, the master plan was going to come in for staff review this month, and then it was going to be submitted to the commission in June, which it will be referred out to Fairfax County and Virginia, and then we'll review it for draft at September.
I mean, we say this every time they bring something in. We're not going to look at another thing until we have the master plan submission. Can we not table this until we get the master plan?
I think for budgetary reasons, they're trying to move forward, but you can ask the Army if there's time.
Chris? You have to identify yourself for the record, please.
Chris Landgraf, I'm the master planner for Fort Belvoir. I don't think it was covered in, I think it's in the documentation, but I don't think Ms. Kelly addressed it. This is a 4-phase project, and the funding has actually been authorized for the first phase as $12. And obviously with the current fiscal reality, they're trying to keep on track with that to make sure that they move this project forward for obligation before they lose the funding for the parking. The commitment is to the first 3 phases. The 4th phase, the renovation, is the one that is the farthest out and has the most chance of being pulled. But the commitment is to do the first phase, which is the parking, so that they have actual room to build the facility, and then move in quickly with the building of the new facility and moving forward. Tabling this at this time would potentially put them into reprogramming and potentially lose the project. So that's why they're pushing forward to move the project and keep it on track with the original budget schedule set in 12 for the project phasing.
So can you confirm the schedule that we just heard for your master plan?
Yes, we are actually, we just finished up edits. We are actually staffing it to both Fairfax County and NCPC, drafts to the master plan this month, most likely after the holiday this month. And then we will take comments back from both Fairfax County and NCPC, re-edit and submit for the June commission deadline, so that it'll be on the September commission meeting. So we are on track for that.
September will be final or preliminary? Final?
September will be preliminary,
Preliminary.
because it is a master plan. It requires an environmental documentation. So at the same time the master plan comes out, the environmental impact statement will be out for public comment. And so it can't go final until the environmental documentation's been completed.
And will this be the last item to come before us before we see your master plan?
Unfortunately, no, because we had a series of projects that were sub-projects of BRAC elements that got delayed because of the needing to complete the BRAC projects before they could come forward. So there are still some projects that will come forward. Inclusive in that is the museum, and some of them are already final. You've seen preliminaries on them. But the museum and golf course reconfiguration, that you've seen a preliminary on both, will actually be coming forward very soon for a final. And then we do have a couple of small projects that were, again, sub-elements of the BRAC builds that were delayed until infrastructure was complete, that will be coming forward. But all of them comply with the 1993 and the revised master plan, and they were part of the BRAC project list, which actually did talk about land use redesignations in the BRAC EIS from 2007.
I wanted to get something clarified. In the past actions, when we had our big dust up over Fort Belvoir, was the action of the commission very clearly that we did not want to see a single project until a master plan has been submitted, reviewed, and approved?
No, sir.
What did we say before?
We actually amended.
Right, that's what staff had recommended, and the commission amended it to say, I can't remember off the top of my head, it might say Maine.
Right.
Choose not to.
So, the reason I ask this is that I am actually of the impression that we are making substantial progress in seeing more comprehensive thinking at Fort Belvoir, and that there is an earnest effort to comply with the wishes of this commission. And I think that if we take a stand and just say no at this moment, that it's going to kill the good progress that we've seen and the cooperation that we've seen. So I would not be in favor of simply saying no at this point. I mean, granted, we're not necessarily seeing exactly what we'd like to see, but I think that we should build on the progress that we've seen rather than be upset that we haven't seen as much progress as we might have wanted.
I would like to underscore that on the periodic meetings that I and staff have arranged by Mr. Provancha with senior DOD leaders from the various installations. I could, and Mr. Provancha will back me up, I'm sure, say that there is a much greater level of cooperation and collaboration at the staff level. Things are moving along as well as can be expected on major projects like this, absent a completed master plan. And I can underscore and say that planners, DOD-related planners, are very cognizant of our need for master plans. And we have those commitments from the highest levels. So I would underscore what Peter said, that things are better. Mr. Hart?
I'm going to address the transportation management component of this analysis, and I'd like to say that I would feel very comfortable accepting project-specific TMP documents if they were part and parcel of an installation-wide transportation management plan, which I think would set district-wide or precinct-wide objectives within which each one of the projects would meet certain objectives. But I'm not comfortable at all seeing each individual project come in with their own separate plan. I think it needs to be coordinated with the master plan with a TMP that is installation-wide. So insofar as there is a installation TMP, each project then can be higher or lower according to the specifics and requirements of those projects within the overall objectives. So I want to go on record saying that I want to see an installation TMP. And then each project then can be part of the implementation of that, so.
Right, that's the intent. There will be a TMP submitted with the master plan when it comes in.
There is, and actually, the project timing for this project, the TMP that was actually done for this project was actually done by the same company who's doing our base-wide TMP. So all of the elements, all of the TMPs that have been done in the past, we were taking all of the alignment from those because some of that was BRAC driven, and we folded all of that into the TMP so that we're not going to have a TMP once our main TMP is done that is leaving any of our other TMPs sitting out without the possibility of achieving their goals. I mean, the BRAC goals were set to the 60% parking ratio, and all of our TMPs are working to get us to those goals throughout and across the entire installation. Inclusive with that is the continued interactivity with Fairfax County and the connector bus services. What wasn't shown on this is that the property immediately adjacent, DLA, actually does have its own bus line as well. So some of the folks who come from a different avenue of approach to INSCOM actually do ride the DLA bus and walk across. We do have a pedestrian pathway connection on that end.
And see, it's that kind of tailoring that would make sense if you understood the umbrella. But I must say that if INSCOM has that affinity and connection to mass transit, its parking ratios might be much smaller than an installation that's much farther afield. As far as the overall installation transportation management plan, you'll probably have some installations that need more POV than others. So that's why I'm saying I'd like to see the overall TMP.
That will be submitted in June.
Ms. White?
I just wanted to make one more comment. I like what was added to the staff recommendations for additions to the TMP, especially the monitoring and evaluating so that you can go back and make adjustments as you need to, as you figure out people's patterns. And I appreciate you just laying out for us what the next steps are going to be and what we're going to see before we get to the master plan. And I agree about the level of cooperation, Peter, entirely.
As part of the BRAC ROD, Record of Decision, we actually do have a Transportation Demand Management Coordinator on Fort Belvoir who is reaching out to the 145 mission partners that Carol was commenting on to coordinate these TMP activities, including carpools, van pools, private bus lines, to try to find any avenue possible to get us globally down to the 60% parking.
That's a lot of moving parts.
It is.
Mr. Gunning and then Mr. Provencio.
Does the plan say whether there will be charges for the parking?
We are not able to charge anyone for parking. It's DOT policy, don't charge people to park.
I don't know how you're going to get people out of their cars if it costs to take transit and it's free to park.
Well, transit is subsidized, so that people do have that option. And
Is it free or is it subsidized?
it's subsidized. But by setting the limitation and working with folks, a lot of it is a cultural change. For 20 years, Fort Belvoir didn't have any mass transit capability, so public transit wasn't even an option in some cases. So with BRAC, we have actually, been trying to change the mentality and culture, and we have had significant increases in actual bus ridership now that we have buses available. We have actually gone from having just 300 people a month to over 3,000 people a month riding the bus now to two of our new organizations that have come online. And that represents the changing culture of the people who are coming who were more public transit oriented. And we have also, because of the efforts of the Transportation Demand Management Coordinator, opening them back up and working with Fairfax County on carpools and van pools, we've seen an increased ridership. you know, the great representation that we try to use to everybody is just look across the desk. Is there any way that you and the person working across the desk from you can ride in a car together? Because then we would be at a 50% parking ratio. And so that's what we're trying to change the culture that people had with SOVs. Once you show them that other avenues are available, we've actually seen a reduction in parking thus far from nearly 95% SOV down to 82%. And so we've actually reduced it just over the past 5 years of the BRAC process by almost 12%.
I mean, I do hear what you're saying, but it is the military where people get ordered to do things that they may not necessarily want to do, as opposed to saying, what would the market say? 3,000 trips a month is just a little bit over one trip, you know, per person per month. You know, so it's not, or 2 trips per person per month. It's not a ton. I'm just very uncomfortable authorizing your building the garage before we hear about what your real plans are to manage travel demand here. And you know, and it's not just what happens on Fort Belvoir. People are coming from all over to get there. So what we decide to do has a real impact on the, you know, on everyone else who's trying to commute in our region. So. You know, I don't think I'll be voting in favor of this, but I understand that I might be overruled. But I feel very strongly that we've asked about this over and over again, and it's very difficult to authorize the, you know, more parking without having a good understanding of what you're going to be really doing to aggressively manage travel demand. So thank you.
Mr. Costa.
Maybe I'll try to put out a proposal, because I understand the issue in terms of looking at this TMP in the context of what they are going to propose in the master plan TMP. We're going to receive that information shortly, and I think one of the things you may want to consider in this EDR is that this is preliminary, that as they submit this, when they submit for final, we'll have that information that they also include a discussion about how this TMP and their proposals with respect to this building, this project, reflects the goals of what they're proposing in their master plan TMP. So at least you'll have some discussion in terms of, you know, what they're looking at base-wide, and then how this TMP is going to fit into that, and that you would require that information to be submitted prior to the time they resubmit this for final review. So I think that's a missing link. We're going to get that information shortly. It does have to be referred out to the county. They're going to give us their comments. And I'm not sure when you're planning what your plans are in terms of submitting this back to us. But it would seem to me that you need that. You're asking for that information, and that could be provided at the next step.
I would make the motion to include that provision.
I think you're working hard.
I think it's in there.
Okay.
Mr. Costa, you want to restate that fairly succinctly?
Yeah, I'll try. Let me see if we can insert this.
We don't need the final wording, just make sure.
Right.
Clarify, were you reiterating and reconfirming that there are some stated requirements? Here, there's, regarding the TMP?
There's a whole section at the end of the EDR dealing with the TMP. So what I'm going to propose is that maybe a separate bullet, the transportation management should also include, and I would maybe make that the first bullet, kind of its relationship to the draft master plan TMP, including installation-wide TMP, its goals and objectives for this precinct of the base. So at least there'll be that'll kind of force the staff as well as the applicant to address those issues prior to the time you review it next time, the next step.
Someone want to move that rough language? It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion on that amendment? It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, no. All right, it's amended. I think we've got the gist of it. So. Mr. Provincial, could we give you the last word on your project?
Appreciate that. On the issue of DOD's commitment to mass transit benefits program, let the record state it's the largest in the NCR. more than 30,000 of the 70,000 DoD folks who are not on military installations participate. The program I'm most familiar with is the one subsidized by the Pentagon. With the benefit increasing to $245, it's more than a $50 million a year program. It is about I've been told it's 6 or 7 times larger than the next largest federal agency. There's also significant internal controls since the days when people were selling their benefits on eBay. That is no longer occurring because of the precautions in place. I'd like to commend Belvoir on the submission of this project. I think there's a lot of positive aspects, to include even the parking. It was good to see that we have a high standard that we've enforced in the past about the secure perimeter and having visitor parking outside, so that we didn't protect folks equally at the same level at a significant cost. The 3-to-1 ratio between the folks parking in the raised garage as opposed to the surface parking, I think, is commendable. The use of pervious surfaces and a variety of environmental compensations. The reforestation, I think, is at a 2-to-1 ratio. The positive kudos from the environmentalists on the Fairfax County board, I think, are all very, very positive. I have the same recollection as several of the fellow commissioners about the language. It was discussed, described as a dust-up. I call it we cussed and discussed the issue of, if you don't bring a master plan, don't submit any projects. I think at the time of that discussion, Belvoir was very forthcoming and let us know that they had more than 20 projects in the pipeline that we would be seeing. Subsequently, we found out too that several of the agencies in the NCR had older master plans than Belvoir, so we saw how quickly that single moratorium or prohibition just was not practical. So clearly my position is to support the EDR with this current modification. And I believe that, could we get a commitment from Belvoir that you'll not only entertain the requests about the transportation plan, but the 3 recommendations about evaluating the resiting or the reconfiguration of the parking garage, bicycles, and bus routes, shelters?
We've actually
would be
already
evaluated.
started the reevaluation of the parking. Staff gave us a heads up on that. We're already looking at that one.
Good.
Bus shelters, the project actually has discussed funding a bus shelter. The bus turnaround capability, we have to talk to Fairfax County about that because of adding time to the overall route. Trying to keep this route as a 30-minute headway is one of the goals that they have within the Fairfax Connector system. So I don't know how much time that would add to have it come down. The actual bus stop location on Kingman, other than not having a bus shelter, is less than 2,000 feet away from the building, which does put it within the walking distance of within the NCR's prescribed walking distance. So we've always felt that that's actually a good location for it because it allows then DLA bus riders who want to come out from DLA to go there and not have to walk closer to the actual INSCOM entry point. But we can look at with Fairfax County. We have a very good working relationship with Fairfax Connector, and we are working to try to improve the bus routes and times because we do recognize that the longer it takes on public transportation, the less likely people want to do it. And so we're trying to make them as efficient as possible so that people will be willing to ride the bus.
Gotcha. Appreciate you reinforced that the Army standard is 2,000 feet to walk. I was in a meeting yesterday with the Marine Corps colonel, and his standard was 4 miles. If he can live 4 miles from the gym, he can run to the gym and work out for 2 hours and then run home, and that's a normal standard for Marine Corps. The difference between the services.
And the Washington headquarters service staff. Mr. Hart? Yes.
One final comment. As you submit the installation-wide TMP, I would encourage you to look at Fort Bragg and analyze how they can have an internal bus system that allows them to move soldiers around the base, not involving an external transit system. I know that that's unusual, and there's a lot of, discussion both sides on whether that's doable or not, but it would be worthwhile to take a look at that and do a critique on, how applicable something like that might be for a base as large as Fort Belvoir and as number of people as you've had.
We after the conversation we had about this last time, we have had our legal agency looking at that to find out how we can possibly do that. because we do see a value in that, because obviously the Fairfax Connector, trying to keep 30-minute headways, there's no way to get everybody to every single building on Fort Belvoir. And so being able to move people, and again, culturally speaking, you know, people who've been driving forever and have the ability to go out for lunch don't like to not have the ability to get lunch. So we are also working with AFES, our Army Air Force Exchange Service, to try to provide mobile food services that can go across the installation to try to change that culture, to get people, you know, to take mass transit and then still be able to get a variety of things to eat versus just having to bring the same bag lunch all the time. So we are looking at all aspects of this to try to get people out of their cars and into the pool, as they say.
Mr. Landgraf, thank you for your continued good collaboration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sensing no further discussion, the EDR before us is for the preliminary site and building plans for INSCOM Phase 1 as amended. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor of the EDR as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? No. One no. Great, thank you. And I believe that is the end of our agenda. Is there anything else to come before us? Hearing none. Thank you. Mr. Hart?
Yeah, I've got a question. It was raised in part of this discussion. Can staff provide a list of all the installations over which we, have some review authority, and what the status of those comprehensive plans are, so we can see who's tardy and who's, up to date?
I'm sure we can.
Master plans.
Yeah.
Provide. That's good.
We will do that. Good suggestion. Yep. All right, thank you. We are adjourned.